Welcome, everyone. It's good to see you all.
Yes. Good morning. Well, I am so delighted that we're going to see behind the screen this morning of the magic that Dorothy does for us, that she's done for, over a year, 2 years. These wonderful poems that enhance our reflections. And Dorothy's going to talk to us about how she uses poetry and what poetry is for her, and also share.
第三个女儿，她进到了禁忌的房间，不可以进去的，打开。
We'll have to have everybody muted for a minute. She's also going to share about how she uses poetry to get unstuck, and the theme of her father. And this is right around Father's Day, isn't it? It seems like a perfect topic. Is Father's Day international, or is that just an American holiday? I guess we don't know, but we'll have to find that out.
I think it's an American holiday.
It's Canadian too.
Okay, so
It exists in France too.
Oh, Father's Day is getting a wide audience. Yeah. So we're going to be talking about fathers today, as well as poetry. I'd like to start just with a couple of thoughts about poetry as the royal road to the implicit. A friend of mine hates poetry, absolutely hates it. A number of people hate poetry. And she says she hates it because it's a terrible tease. It tells you things and then you don't understand it deliberately. And she feels like it's like her older sisters teasing her and saying things that she doesn't understand and laughing at her for not understanding them. I don't think the poet is laughing at us, but I thought about that and I thought, yes, poetry is deliberately elusive because it prevents you from understanding in the usual way, in a linear, rational way. And so it does tease you into going into that deeper, implicit, non-linear, bodily space of felt sense. And that's why it's so powerful. We use the word evocative for poetry. It evokes, it draws you, it brings you into the implicit world. And you find yourself there, understanding in a very different way. I find that when my clients are kind of stuck in a circular kind of thinking and expressing, I'll say back what I feel are the fire engine words in the way that I would say a poem. You can't stand it anymore. You are fed up. You want to quit, whatever it is. And I'll say it back the way that I would say a poem. And often the person hears themselves in a different way then. So without any more musing about poetry in general, Dorothy, we're really looking forward to how you use it.
Thank you, Lynn. Um, poetry speaks to me in many different ways. And sometimes there is just the joy of the language. But I must admit, when I decided to write poetry, I guess in the 80s or so, when I was in my 30s, and a poem just trickled out of me about my father. My first poem that I remember writing about, which even back then was about getting through with communicating to him when he was behind the New York Times. I think I just, for me, saw it as a way to go to stuck places within me. Something about the medium, as Lynn was so saying, I so resonated with what she was saying about here, this medium that feels so difficult to understand so often. I'm not a natural when it comes to poetry. Like, how to analyze and explain is not something that comes natural to me, even though I was a lit major in college. It was a struggle to understand. And that just feels like a metaphor for growing up in my family. Like I just couldn't get through to those people. But there's this push or drive in me to understand. And so the wish to be understood through poetry, and it just blended in with or fit something within me that I would choose a medium where it was hard to get through, and that I would write something and people sometimes didn't understand what I was saying because I was so obtuse and I was so indirect. And that was the feedback I'd often get about my poetry. Just say what you want to say. So we'll see later. I was going to share 2 of my poems, and we'll see if they do communicate. But that's something I strive for. And I think because I often start with this motivation of how can I get unstuck? And it is so murky and so many jagged edges to starting from that place, particularly around a family member that you have such a long history with, that it's quite a challenge in that way. And the other thing that I notice for myself when I did write poetry, that I took a few workshops, and one workshop teacher said to me, the last one I took poetry with, said, your poems are really narratives. I think you might want to try the memoir genre. And that really opened up something for me. It gave me a lot more freedom for what I wanted to do. So you'll see in those 2 poems, there's definitely a narrative quality to them. But what I'd like to do is to first, before I read the poem I chose, which is Late Poem to My Father by Sharon Olds, I wanted to tell you what appealed to me about that poem was there's a shift in it that she makes in trying to understand her father. He was an alcoholic, and she struggled in many ways. But in this poem, there's a shift for her that changes the way she views her father. And that was really helpful for me to see. And I brought that into, when I was searching for some poems I wrote about him last night, I realized I was led to poems where I felt, for me, there was a shift in a way of seeing him, which, what a gift that is, to be, when you're really stuck in a relationship with a parental figure or a parent over the years, and you find this other eyesight, this new eyesight, a way to see the relationship that's different and really does get through some of the murkiness. It's really exciting. So before I read the poem, I just wanted to open it up a bit to all of you and see what your relationship to poetry is, what thoughts that you have in things I've said or things that you bring when you hear a poem, when you read a poem, just anything that might pop out for you.
In fact, Megs Glidewell here from Sarasota, been a participant in focusing for about 20 years. Yes, I've often, it seems to me, focusing is poetry in reverse. Because if you read a wonderfully stated, a poem that really speaks to you deeply, you get a felt sense. So I thought so I've always regarded bi-directional. So if somebody, I wonder if somebody has difficulty focusing, if they were, I don't know, would reading wonderful poetry and encouraging them to read poetry help them plug in? Anyway, thanks for the opportunity to say that.
Yeah, I would agree with you that reading poetry, at least for me, can definitely help me to focus on something that is doesn't have the clarity. But I wonder what other people are thinking too. Thank you, Megs.
Well, I'm thinking like what is really the definition of poetry? Because when I heard Lynn say that some people hate poetry, it doesn't really make sense to me because there's such a wide variety of poetry. And I'm sure they had, I mean, I guess they had some experience with some poem that didn't resonate for them, and then they made it into I hate poetry in general. So I'm wondering if you could, what is the definition for you? Like, what's the difference between prose and poetry? And I know there's like some people say that some kind of prose is like poetry, and some paintings are like poetry, and some are obviously not. So I'm wondering if that would be an inquiry here to even
Yeah,
know
I
what
think
we're
the way,
talking about.
right. I think that the way that the person, my friend, thought of poetry as communication that isn't direct and linear and rational and declarative, communication that is meant to evoke what's beneath the surface rather than to tell you the story or the facts. And of course, poetry is certainly in prose, in speeches, in our communication. For me, any kind of communication that is evocative is poetry, including the handle words in focusing in therapy. That there are times when I wish that what my clients were saying was recorded. Sometimes it is recorded. Sometimes you'll watch a video of a demo or a therapy session, and you'll say, "Wow, that's sheer poetry." So I I think that an academic distinction might not be as important for this exploration as our own distinctions of what is evocative for us. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm listening. Yeah. So,
You're listening, but there's something more you want.
I'm not. I didn't say that to get like this is it and this is not it.
Uh-huh.
but more as a question, and also a question in myself, like, let's say, just what you said, like you could hear a therapy session or you could read a news article,
Right,
and it evokes something more than just a storyline.
right.
And also when you said less direct, I thought, well, maybe sometimes more direct,
Yes,
but
exactly.
not in a way we are used to.
That's right. Yes. It's that not in a way that we're used to that that can be frustrating for some people if they like things to be the way they're used to, but can be exciting. And it can be very exciting for people who don't like it, and then they get a glimpse into it. Wow.
Liz.
I used to be one of those people who was intimidated by poetry, and I don't know if it's that poetry has changed over the last decades, but my disappointment in poetry is that whenever I think about reading a poem, I'm always expecting something exciting. I'm expecting that language is going to be used really differently, like clay or like music. And what I usually find in a lot of the poems that people seem to like, the man whose last name is White with a Y instead of an I is a great example. I find that it's prose that's divided into lines to look like poetry. And I find that the language is prosaic and over sentimentalized and not experimental at all, and trying too hard. I used to like William Carlos Williams, people who really condensed a lot of image and feeling into a very short, well, condensed is the word. And now I find that the poetry that people like just kind of goes on and on. And I keep trying, you know, I keep hearing, for example, of Sharon Olds, and I'm reading some of her poetry, and it's just kind of what I'm talking about. It's not evocative enough. So I want my poetry to be more like I want my music to be. I want to hear a little Bartok. I want to hear a little Hindemith. I want to hear a little Schoenberg. I don't want to hear always kind of Mozart or something. You know what I mean? I think poets should try harder. That's what I think. To write poetry that I like.
Yes.
Well, when you're speaking, Liz, you remind me of some of my own journey around poetry, that it shifted so much. I mean, it's gone in so many different directions. I mean, I remember I was like just sitting at the feet of my poetry, my romantic poetry teacher, or even my father when he would do at the dinner table, just quote the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. I mean, the music in the romantic poems is, you know, quite moving. And I always strove for that. I just couldn't get the music. It's a real art and a real skill. Like, I suppose composers are very different, people who write music, and, you know, what the lyric quality of the music that they might aim for, or the disjunctions in some of the more modern music. But, you know, music has this quality. I mean, poetry has this quality that it can sweep you away with the musical quality. It's something I strove for, but really couldn't get that. It's like I don't have the ear for it. But what I want to, I think, invite you to do is to have all of the reactions and responses, like Liz is referring to, and to be with it, own it, just let yourself have them. I can get very angry at a poem that I just don't understand, and not, why is this poet doing this? I almost personalize it. But I think ultimately what I want to invite you to do, and we're going to later when we get to the attunement, I want to invite you to see what images come up for you, is to use it in a focusing way of just what you get in touch with on the inside. I feel like any vehicle that helps us come to a greater understanding of something within us that we haven't been able to reach or have access for has a validity to it. And
Mhm.
so it might not be through poetry. I mean, that's why we're blessed with so many ways of artistry, so many different vehicles to express ourselves. And I mean, I just remember when this poem about my father a long time ago trickled out. I was staying at that time, my boyfriend was a poet, and I just ran around so excited to just have these words trickle out and have meaning for me and state something that was somewhat close to the surface, but not ready to come out. So it's almost like inviting you to, in part, have your views, but also put the views aside when we go inside and just let any images surface for you and not worry about definitions. That's the way I think of it. Ultimately, it's for us.
Maybe this would be a good time to read Sharon Olds' poem, and for us to do what you're saying and just open to what it brings. And as you're saying, that there are kind of two levels of response. The one of I like it, I don't like it, or I understand it, I don't understand it. And another level of just letting it wash over you and see what it brings from inside you, what the feeling of it is.
Sounds good. Late poem to my father, Sharon Olds. Suddenly I thought of you as a child in that house, the unlit rooms and the hot fireplace with the man in front of it, silent. You move through the heavy air to your physical beauty. A boy of 7, helpless, smart. There were things the man did near you, and he was your father, the mold by which you were made. Down in the cellar, the barrels of sweet apples, picked at their peak from the tree, rotted and rotted. And past the cellar door, the creek ran and ran, and something was not given to you, and something was taken from you that you were born with, so that even at 30 and 40, you set the oily medicine to your lips every night, the poison to help you drop down unconscious. I always thought the point was what you did to us as a grown man. But then I remembered that child being formed in front of the fire, the tiny bones inside his soul, twisted in green stick fractures, the small tendons that hold the heart in place, snapped. And what they did to you, you did not do to me. When I love you now, I like to think that I am giving my love directly to that boy in the fiery room, as it could reach him in time. as if it could reach him in time.
Well, thank you, Dorothy. It's powerful. I feel the shift so clearly.
Mm.
I don't know if, yeah. Thank you very much.
How do you experience the shift, Sophie?
In different ways, when you, I can't remember exactly the words, but when you, it's as if you come closer to your father, history, and what happened to him, and you are able to love him through that connection and what he was able to not pass on.
Mm.
So your focus shifts in a way. That's the way I perceive. And I do feel the love in it, the shift and your love, in the reality of what you now see. That's what I
Thank you. Now this is Sharon Oles' poem.
okay, yes.
Yeah, I just
No,
wanted
yours. Okay.
but yeah, I hear what you're saying.
There was something that Saul Bellows said about greatness being the ability to not pass on the trauma that you've lived. Reminded me of that. I also thought of my own father as a child and what he went through.
I think for me, what it came to me is that I think a quality in poems of having more than one dimension. Like, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right now, but it's like looking at a person not only from a perspective, what we think of them, who they are today, but also seeing them in different, I think, in different times in their lives.
Mm.
And I think that's in some way, anyway, more true that we are all not just the whatever 60-year-old, but also the 2-year-old and also the 12-year-old. And so for me, the poem sort of represents an expression of that. And in my own, I guess, relationship to my family, I think one benefit from therapy or having whatever work I did was to not see the parent and my siblings just as this good or bad fairy tale characters, but as people who also have their history and their strengths and weaknesses, and sort of in a more dimensional way that's more true than just, oh, he was bad, he was an alcoholic, or he was whatever, withdrawn, or he only read the newspaper and didn't pay attention to me. But also, and that's, I think, one way to see them in different developmental stages in their lives.
Thank you, Robert, for saying this. It's reminding me how poetry or painting or kind of has a way to grab the whole of it without description or without saying there's this and that. And this and that.
Yes.
But the whole of it is in there. The different times, the different dimensions.
Yes, I like that, Sophie. It's like Jean Genlin saying, what's the feeling of this whole thing?
Well, and I think that's also going back to what you said, like your friend saying poetry is less direct. It's actually captures somehow more.
Yes.
and also the healing power of poetry, in the sense that, to me, poetry, there are these different levels, as were mentioned. I can think of poetry as something very academic. And I remember when I was at school, I used to learn the poets, and especially the English and American poets. And I thought, I didn't quite understand. But then when I found myself at a time being in contact with something that I was feeling very deep inside, and I had to stop and felt sense. And then a poem would come from that, and the words would come from me going back and forth from the felt sensing and finding the word, and as Jean says, the word that is wanting to, is implying, and until I found that word. So then when I did, something changed in me. And if it had to do with a relationship, like in this case with your poem, Dorothy, that I so resonated with, and it took me to these two dimensions of first wanting to know more about what it was like for you, your experience, and then also resonating with my experience, with my relationship with my father. So poems for me have these different levels, these different dimensions, and for me, a very forward moving thing when I write. Well, I cannot call myself a poet, of course, but when I write, what comes from inside, and for me, that is poetry too.
I don't think you have to worry about calling yourself a poet. I mean, that's what I'm finding over the years, is like just claiming that we all have a right to write, and we all have a right to express through writing, as we do if we're painters or ceramicists or whatever, or singers and writers of song, whatever vehicle that stirs us to express ourselves. We have a right. And I try not to worry too much about, is this something that will be acceptable to the public or fit a certain definition, but to really allow that self-expression to come out without the critic present. Yes, Lenore?
It was interesting what you just said about the critic also, because I like to write haikus. I find haikus are very easy, much more, I have to find the word for it, but I can be more in touch with what's happening inside through not expressing as much, because when I try to write a poem with many words, it becomes more difficult for me. For whatever the reasons are, maybe the judgment or whatnot, but the getting it right. Whereas the haiku, finding one word to express an inner feeling or sense comes more naturally for me. I also it reminded me, the greatest teacher I had through all my education was in high school. She was a poet, Daisy Alden, her name was, and we would sit in the classroom. She said, I just want you to become aware of all your senses and just write it down in a stream of consciousness. Everything you hear, everything you taste, everything you see, smell, touch, just write it down. And then I was able to write poetry for a while. And then I went to college, of course, and they destroyed it. Your sentence structure is not correct. With your punctuations. And it was terrible for me. It was, I couldn't write after that for a while. So the high school teacher really opened me up, and it was really a class in felt sense, in a sense, right? And I was able to write from there, but it was sad. Then I started to write again a little bit, but not much. So haikus work for me.
Yes, Liz.
I can relate to the haiku situation because I also do things best when there's a tight structure And I kind of hate myself for that. And I write a lot of songs. And so I write a lot of lyrics. And lyrics have to be really tight. And it's a real OCD exercise because I rhyme everything compulsively. And I feel like poets, I envy them because they could say anything. They have it easy. They don't have to rhyme anymore. You could just write whatever you want, and call it a poem. And I can't do that. And I'm actually in my songwriting trying to get more loose, as some of us are saying that. I realized, gee, I don't have to exactly rhyme in a song. I have this Stephen Sondheim OCD neurosis about how everything has to be like a puzzle. But I also just wanted to say that it's funny to me that you picked this poem, Dorothy, because just completely unrelated. I read that poem yesterday, and I'd never read poetry, but I read that poem because I was looking up images of Sharon Olds' long gray hair, because I have a fantasy that someday, if I'm patient enough, I will have long gray hair like Sharon Olds. And then maybe I will be more of a poet.
What an image. There's a poem right there.
Well, there is something about about not being inhibited.
Yes.
That goes with the poetry, and that goes with, I'm just going to have this wild long gray hair and not care about violating old lady hair norms.
Talk about breaking out of a mold.
It reminds me of the poem about when I'm old, I'll wear purple. And all of my friends at some point in history, I forget when we're quoting that poem, it took over everybody. But maybe this is a good time, Dorothy, for you to read us your poems so that we get a chance to really take them in before we go into our breakout rooms.
Okay. The writing is, I realized, a little light, but with my eyesight, bear with me. Remember now, I'm I don't know what the word is, justification or something, that I found that I like story poems. So I'm telling a story to get to something. And what was amazing to me is that, and I stayed up so late last night looking at different poems, and this whole idea that that I've been looking to celebrate my father for a long time. Like after he passed away when I was 36, and let's see, it was 1981. I started writing some poems about him, and I did reach a place of appreciation and love, and then I lost it again. And so it's so circular as we do our focusing, how much it takes us to these deep places. And I had this sense of excitement last night of like rediscovering some things about the relationship. This one first is receiving a gift from my father. And I just want to say, I looked up the patience plant that he grew very often. And I always got confused. Is it patience or impatience? So when I looked it up on Google, they use both. So I'll stick with the patience name. Let's see. Receiving a gift from my father. In September, you dig up the patience from your garden. Fill big brown pots and wrap each with tinfoil. Carefully, you fit those into a box to keep them straight for the drive into my apartment. you buzz and I come to help carry up all those long, spindly stem, forget-me-like pink flowers. We sit on the couch and talk of your future in Sun City and how the everyday swim will make your left side better again, and how you will throw that hickory cane back in my attic toy box where it belongs. And after the sun slant, hints of dusk, he gets up. Before he walks out the door, he reminds me about patience, how they will fast if they don't, how they will last if they don't get water every day. And I think, once again, how strange he gives his undisciplined daughter plants that ask for so much care. And I think it was such a pleasure to find that poem. It's just to find this gift and how important it was to bring this to me. It's just amazing how memory can blot out the good, how in anything, like I've noticed with the focusing, how much I've focused on areas of pain. And it's the poetry that has been a source of finding something different. It's just so exciting to me. One more. I'm so sorry about my eyesight. Okay. Light does come through trees. I had been away for many years, married and unmarried, but mother and father never moved. I come home late morning and stay in the street a while to get a full view of the weathered clapboard house. No matter how brilliant the grass and the tulip trees, my eyes go toward the dark of the unreflecting brown wood. I walk through every room. How dark they are in midday. My father planted the shrubs years before I was born, almost shutting out all possibility of natural light. I sleep in my old room, placing my head at the backboard, close to the window, and wake early to sunlight. With each move of the dense maple hugging the window, I see new shapes spread across my bare skin. It took some years away to figure out such a simple thing, a way of getting closer to the light. So I'm real thankful for those discoveries that kept me up till 2 a.m. looking for these poems. But just something in my heart really wanted to share them because it's not about making perfect poems. It's only you know what really speaks to you and what really evokes something in you. And you feel it, like in the focusing way, you know, as I approach this activity of looking for these poems, I could feel this old clenching in my body, like from my throat to my belly. I just feel it clench up, and I could feel in this process of discovery of there are beautiful gems in my relationship with my father. And I could feel like a loosening inside. And for that, I'm grateful. And I want to offer you that possibility for yourself. So I want to invite you maybe to close your eyes for a minute before we go in.
Dorothy, before we tune into ourselves, could you just read the last line again? I missed something.
Oh, okay. It took some years away to figure out such a simple thing, a way of getting closer to the light.
It's a beautiful line.
Dorothy, is it okay if I say that that was just so, so beautiful, both of those poems, and your style is amazing? How you tell the story, and then at the end you come up with that sort of conclusion. And I just, the gaps were also very beautiful. When you were taking a moment to read, it added to the poem, and I just love your style, and it really touched me. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Steph. Thank you.
I can feel the shift in your poem too.
Right. Absolutely.
So if there's, any other words, please take this time. Otherwise, we'll go into a little attunement of back to closing your eyes and just you take a deep breath. It just helps let go of the tension. You take your hands and just squeeze them tight and let them go. And the same with your shoulders, if that helps you, just squeeze and just let them go back and around and let them drop. And just let the breath pass through your whole body, out to your fingertips, down to your feet. And just see if any images, just give yourself a little piece of quiet and silence and see if anything comes up. And if it doesn't, that's okay too. And if it does, take a minute to jot a few words down or an image, a scene, an experience that evokes something within you. And we'll just take another minute to allow for that. And let your eyes open.
Hi, welcome everybody. Let's take a breath to make that transition to this world. And then we'd love to hear anything that you'd like to share from your breakout rooms.
Vivian, is it okay if I just share about the 3D movie?
Sure.
Vivian had so much wisdom. I was just soaking it in. But one of the things that she said that was so beautiful was that poetry is like a 3D written word.
I just want to share, Dorothy, that I've been thinking a lot about my father, who is now 93. And I know that now I'm here now and he's here now. And there's a way that I want to come nearer, but in a safe way. And when we got into I always want to call it the waiting room, but it's not the waiting room, the other room, whatever the room when we sent to our room.
Yeah.
What is it? What's the name?
A breakout room.
Oh, thank you, the breakout room. We both, Leonore and I, wanted to write. We were in the middle of the wanting to write. So we gave each other the time to write. And I have been looking for that way to come nearer and to ask my father some question I may have when he's not here, when we are both not here. And I feel I have come closer to know what and how to come nearer in a safe way. So thank you very much.
That's
A
wonderful.
wonderful image of coming near. I really love that image. It reminds me when my father, he'd go to Arizona, Sun City, in his later years, and when in the fall, and the fall before he did pass away, he passed away in Arizona. I remember walking around the block, like I would come from the city to Westchester and take these walks around the block, he with his cane, and I would say, oh, maybe this time, you know, this whole idea of, I want to come nearer. So it's just a very beautiful image with so much emotion in it.
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you. And like Leonore was saying, gentle, be gentle.
So maybe that's a line to a new poem. I want to come nearer.
I want to say too with Sophie, yeah, with the gentleness, because it's such a vulnerable place. You know, come nearer carefully, gently, because there was so much there that wasn't talked about.
Actually, it's a line to a hymn, nearer, my God, to thee.
Mhm.
I'm just thinking like how writing poetry could relate to clearing a space where we can name things as they appear, without, at least initially, without really choosing if it's a feeling or something that happened or a thought or. And I keep thinking of I forgot who it was talking about her high school teacher who started, writing poems that way.
Yes.
Right.
And I think in some way it's almost like poems are are very precise handles, and then we can see how those lines or the whole poem resonates or doesn't. And I think a lot of art making and writing poetry is also done in that way. That's something that we make something, whether it's a shape or a line or a word, and then check for a resonance, and then keep shaping it until it really fits.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, Robert, you made me just realize that one of the nights, if you really want to bore someone to death, speak to them with perfect articulation and grammar in every single sentence and phrase. And one of the wonders of poetry is it melts away the urge to be the perfect. Yes, so that's condensed, because you cannot condense in everyday language. Prose, somebody was talking about, I think it was Sophie earlier mentioned prose, but yeah, beware politeness. Poetry allows you to remove many constraints that lock the language into patterns that's hard to get out of.
Oh, I love that. I loved what you said. It brings such freedom and even creating and inventing words for what we are trying to say and feeling and sensing. Yes.
Well, Jean loved to do that, right? To create words.
If I could share, Robert, something you said about stuckness. It's just a new way of looking at the like calling an emotion for one. It just like that idea, and then taking away the judgment. Like I have such judgment toward the word and the concept of stuckness, but just if you view it more openly, give it more space, I don't have to surround it with such a critical eye, and could open up into something, give it a chance to open up into something.
I love that idea of thinking about stuckness as a different thing, as a different aspect, like a pause that's we haven't consciously asked for.
Also, what you just said about Dorothy, the viewing it more openly, and there was another sentence you said that I don't remember correctly. I think that's in some way, or could be a definition of poetry.
Right. It could also be a waiting for something more to come. A waiting and a being with what's there to come out. Right.
Right.
I was once writing a set of guidelines, and I thought it would be really easy at the start, and I got through 9 out of the 10. And number 10, I got stuck. It took me 9 days to get unstuck. And I realized because I did not want to admit what number 10 involved. I was stuck because I didn't want to admit that. I did not want to acknowledge something. And it was still annoys me. But yeah, days.
On this August, we're going to have a special program like we did a couple of years ago of writing. So each week there'll be a different reflection on writing and an opportunity for us to write. And it would be wonderful, Dorothy, if you would do one on writing poetry, and maybe other people will help create a space where we could maybe even write a poem together as a group. I didn't mean to take us out of the moment there, but I was just imagining all the potential of dipping into writing poetry.
That's what I was thinking, that pause, that at least, I mean, that's what happened for me, just feeling into potential.
Yes.
So
Very exciting,
I
right?
thought it was a very rich pause.
You know, this has really helped me learn that what gets in the way of me in poetry is the way I judge myself and the way I judge the writing. And it prevents me from really being able to get something out of it because I'm judging myself thinking, what am I not getting here? Something I'm not getting, I'm supposed to get. There's going to be like a test at the end of this, and I'm going to have to like say, this is what it is. And like, this whole process, this whole thing has really helped. So, yeah.
One of the things I could suggest, Steph, is like as you have a focusing partner, maybe with that partner, you could share what you've written. Reading out loud something you've written just has a whole different way of it coming into being, and you see things about it that you don't see when you read it to yourself. Just a thought.
So sweet, because I don't write poetry, but now I feel like I have to because you're inviting me to. So thank you, Dorothy.
Dorothy, can I ask you one thing?
Yeah.
This is Shashi.
Oh,
what happened just before you thought of writing this poem?
the 2 poems I read about
The second one, either one, like what happens just before that you say, oh, I need to sit down and write this feeling, or this something is coming, or something is dripping out of my pen, or what do you
I forget
if you can remember. I mean, you
yeah,
know.
it did help to take a workshop because you're compelled. It's like being in school. You have to, not have to, but you are compelled. You're paying money, etc. And it is such a good feeling to be in a group and overcome the fear of rejection of your writing.
No.
So I'm not sure if those came from that place. What I suspect, after my father passed away, that was such a painful time to be able to access the grief. What I suspect is that it came out of a place of wanting to access memories that were can't think of the word, memories that were connecting to a joyful place with him. That's what I'm suspecting, but it was in the 1980s, so I'm not sure.
The reason I ask this, because I lost my father when I was 4 years old.
Wow.
There has been a big hole that nobody has been able to ever fill. And I try to write about it, but there's still a big hole, you know? So as Robert said, maybe the clear space around it or something. I'm trying to grab on to something. I'm trying to like get up, grabbing onto something.
Yeah.
And not just be sobbing and not just be sad.
You know, okay. If I can say in response to what you just said, maybe it would be helpful to think about things you would like to do with him. Or sometimes in my Buddhist group, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh, the leader, died. And people frequently talk about taking a walk with him. Like when you're walking mindfully, you know, think of walking with Thai, you know, or in fact, I was going to do that. I was going to go to the beach in the next time I go and take a walk with my father on the beach. I'm going to do that.
It's beautiful, June. I think Sashi too, just that you're bringing it out today, bringing out to the group, and that you're looking for some words or images or a place to be with this, a walk to take, or it has so much meaning. And it's like telling yourself, like, pay attention, spend more time, because it does take time. That's what I find, the writing. It's like leaving a space for yourself that you might not ordinarily leave this process of writing. And you'd be amazed at what comes forward if you schedule in 2 hours for yourself and words and thoughts about your father. And I do encourage the sharing to somebody you feel safe with, of sharing those words with another.
Hi Dorothy, thanks for sharing so much of your story today. I just remember Gendlin, when I do it, it's the experience of, he said something that we already know what's implicit in our wanting. It's already there, we can imagine it. So I like that idea. It's that it's going towards it, but you already know because it's the missing bit. I like that. It's reclaiming some of that space.
Yeah, I think he used, I seem to recall he used the words that we fill in the blanks of our
Yes,
experience.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
I just want to say, Sasha, I'm glad you said that, the whole, this, because when I write, I'm always writing about something very specific. And so you've given me a whole new conceptual geometry to go with. So thanks. I wrote that down, so I'd be sure not to forget it.
Conceptual geometry.
That's beautiful. Yes. There's a demo that Jean did on YouTube called Ripped Out. And the person is talking about something was ripped out of her. And it's very poetic. You might want to take a look at it.
Is it a YouTube about this?
Yeah. YouTube, right?
It's called Ripped Out.
Mhm. Yeah.
With Jen, with Eugene Jen.
Yeah.
I just Googled ripped out Jean Gendlin and it comes up.
Uh-huh.
That sounds very
Well, it's time for us to stop, and thank you all so much. And Dorothy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorothy. It's amazing. Very, very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye now, everybody.
Yeah.
Wow.
Bye.